Welcome on inside another edition of the Entrepreneur Rep, episode 33. This time bringing on a special guest, one of my buddies here, Adam Dailey. He is an entrepreneur, speaker, investor, best-selling author, VIP hospitality guy, and also calls himself a sports and beer marketer. So what's up, man?
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So I know we've been able to talk at length the last couple of years knowing each other, but would love to dig into how you started, kind of your entrepreneurial journey. So I'll start there. When was the first, I guess, entrepreneurial type of spirit that you had kind of growing up, or your first gig that kind of kicked your career off?
I mean, I think I probably follow that path of your typical entrepreneur. You know, I kind of fit the stereotype or the cliche of, you know, I was out there hustling cookies and washing people's cars. Yep. And, you know, I had a business license for football cards when I realized I could buy them at bulk, you know, and get them half off and go to, you know, and make my money back in half the time. So
Yep.
as a kid, I was always looking for deals, selling stuff to my friends, or, you know, figuring out how to buy and sell something for more.
Originally, I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think you really wanted to get in the business or be an entrepreneur. It was more being an athlete at first. So tell us a little bit about how that all went down.
I mean, so I was a very serious athlete growing up in terms of high school and college. Went to, you know, perennial national championship school where we won 9 national championships, and where, you know, looking back on it, I tell the story now. I'm like, I turned down, you know, Harvard and Stanford and Georgetown, Notre Dame. Those were all my top choices to go to Arkansas, but it was the place where an 18-year-old ambitious male athlete, like you couldn't steer me anywhere other than trying to be the best. And so I didn't see much past that, you know, and when I did, I saw, well, if I ever do get a job or something, then I'll learn more from being on part of a national caliber team, mm-hmm. and a you know, learning discipline and whatnot, than getting, you know, a degree from an Ivy League school. You know, that was the thinking of an 18-year-old ambitious athlete. I don't know if that's correct thinking or not.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, and so I tried that, and, you know, took athletics pretty seriously for a little while after college as well.
What sports or what events did you participate in?
So I was a track and field guy. I was a distance runner. So. And
then what is your best mile?
I ran about a 4:05, 4:06 mile. Never broke 4.
That is crazy, man. But that also took you through Olympic trials as well, I believe. Mm-hmm. we talked about. So
yeah. So I mean that kind of led me on the entrepreneurial journey. Actually,
right.
I competed in the trials in 2000, didn't make the team, and, you know, a few years later was offered, as a former athlete, was offered the opportunity to buy a bunch of tickets to the Athens 2004 Olympics.
Okay.
So through that opportunity, I bought them, not thinking of being an entrepreneur as much as just I had a little extra money, and me and a buddy were like, hey, let's pool our money together and buy a bunch of tickets. And we didn't really know we were creating a business or anything like that. It was almost like stocks or something, like, hey, tickets. We've always heard Olympic tickets are like gold. The system
right here, yeah. So that was your first, I guess, avenue into entrepreneurship, or owning your own company? Was that the first? That
was the first serious one. I mean, okay. I had a couple jobs. I had, you know, 1 to 2 jobs where my boss would tell me I'm not employee material and I need to go do my own thing. So I did hear that a few times, and that was like my first serious, like, entrepreneur, like, high risk, you know, put a bunch of money on credit cards and, you know, roll the dice type of thing.
So how much did you invest at that time, and kind of what was your plan initially? And
I mean, our plan was just to bootstrap it. To be honest, at that point, it was like I wanted to get. I'd lived 2 years in Barcelona right after school, and I wanted to get back to Europe. So for me, it was like, I want to go set up this business for the Olympics and live for a year in Athens.
So as long
Greece,
as I pay my rent,
and
I'm good. Yeah.
And if it's over and I'm not in debt, then that's a success. That was the way I was looking at it beforehand.
But it started blowing up for you. Like, when did you realize this could be a successful business, and how did that all kind of come about?
You know, I think after when we made some money, mm-hmm. and it was like, and we realized what a great experience it was. And then, you know, I realized, like, I liked controlling my own destiny. I didn't really know much about the business.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't really, the word entrepreneur wasn't something in my vocabulary, you know, 15 years ago, 14 mm-hmm. years ago. And if it was like, oh, the guy who had a mail order business and a 7-Eleven and was, you know, it was like one of those guys.
I agree. Same here.
And so after that, it was also like I'd made all these connections within the sports world. I was helping, USA Track and Field and Octagon and all these people. And I kind of was like, hey, now that I'm done with the Olympics, I'm available to hire, and no one took the bait, And so I was like, well, what next? And then, and we looked at the Winter Olympics, which were pretty soon after. They weren't much more than a year out at that point after. And so we said, well, look, we had a good time. We lived in Spain. We lived in Greece. Italy's, same part of the world, and we love Italy. So let's go set up for the Winter Olympics, not knowing anything about it.
So the business kind of being surrounded by the Olympic Games, can you explain the business model a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, the business model's changed over the past 10, 15 years, but it used to be go in early, buy a bunch of inventory, tickets and hotels and whatnot.
How much are we talking? Like hundreds of rooms?
Yeah, hundreds of rooms. Okay. I think in Vancouver in London was the highest amount of rooms, but I mean, we're talking 400 to 600 rooms, times 18 to 24 nights, basically.
And how early are you buying the rooms in order to kind of get ahead of the game?
Couple years out if you're lucky, and you're putting down non-refundable deposits, So I mean, it's like the deals to be made are the early deals, both buying and selling for the most part.
So the idea is you buy these, like, let's say 400 rooms 2 years out, and then at what point before the Olympics are you starting to kind of unload those rooms and make that?
I mean, you're
spread?
trying to make deals sooner rather than later.
Okay.
And that was part of like I had a pretty strong business model as I tried to grow it and scale in London in 2012. I kind of took my eye off the ball in terms of the sales aspect. And so I wasn't paying as much attention to the operations of sales and how we were selling at the clips we needed to be selling at. And that's where we got a little bit hurt, because I didn't realize till late in the game, like, hey, we're not selling what we should be selling. And the competition's a little stronger than what it has been in the past. And so the business has changed also because people are getting savvier in terms of there's Airbnb and, people, a place like London, everyone knows someone who has a friend in London and they can sleep on the floor. No, people aren't intimidated by it in general. People really wait till last minute to make their travel plans now versus 10 years ago as well.
For the Olympics, is that pretty normal where a bunch of different companies or a bunch of different investors are, once they hear it's announced it's going to be the Olympics in this city, all the hotels are automatically bought up? Or
yeah I mean, so as part of the Olympic bid, the organizing committee has to take 80 or 90% of the rooms and show the IOC, we've got these rooms under contract. This is part of our bid to win it. So the 20 or 10% that don't get booked out are the savvy entrepreneurs who are like, what? No, I'm not going to sell to the IOC for $100 a night. I think I can get $500 a night type of thing. And so those are the guys we're dealing with for the most part. Or we'll buy from federations or Olympic committees that have bought directly from the IOC, and same thing. They're wanting commercial transaction. They bought it for 100. They know the market's 500.
And the incentive for them is like they're just going to get a boatload of cash up front. They don't have to worry about it type deal.
Yeah.
When did it? I guess tell me how it scaled. Did you start bringing on employees to help you guys? Like it was just you and a buddy at first in Athens, but once you started seeing it take off.
I mean, in Athens, our whole plan, like I said, was bootstrapping, and we brought over a couple people and paid them. Something ridiculous, $100 a week and a free place to stay.
Right.
And you can work in sports and live in Greece type of thing. And, we kind of followed that model of just getting good, young, vibrant, energetic, extroverted team members and not paying them much, but offering them the experience. So same thing. I think we added a few more in Athens. I think we had a total of like 7 or 8 people by the time the Olympics rolled around. And then we kind of used that same model for Torino the next time. And we'd bring in, we'd have a couple locals. We'd have 1 or 2 Italian type of employees, as well as all our people. Our whole pitch was like, we're going to know the city like a local, but we're going to not speak with an accent. So you can talk to us about American things, and we're going to tell you, oh, this place has the best pizza or whatever.
Right.
Because that was kind of my frustration too in terms of traveling, was like when you're going on a tour or something and you can't even understand the person talking, because they're such a strong accent and they've learned to speak English somewhere else. And so our thing was like, we're going to give you the local flavor, but through an American. So, in Torino, same thing. We kind of had 6, 7 people in Beijing as well. We opened up an office in Beijing, and we did the same thing in Vancouver. We started Vancouver was one of our best Olympics because we started really early. We built a big team around it. We felt really strong about it. And then, the biggest like scaling I'd say we did was after Torino. We made a bunch of money, and that's when we came down to San Diego and set up offices down here. And really, we're like, okay, we've been a gypsy company for the last 6 years, moving around.
Yeah.
Some staff come with us, some don't. We're always hiring locals. We're always building these connections in terms of like in Beijing, we build these strong connections, or in Vancouver, and then you say goodbye to them from a business standpoint. So our plan was definitely in San Diego, like build and grow this business.
So it sounds like it's also like a concierge service. Like you guys aren't just saying, oh, you want a hotel room, here you go, and you're out of it. You're actually on the ground and you're helping these different groups and these people on the ground.
I mean, so our business model's changed. Now we're more of a group-focused business.
Okay.
So we do brokering of, whether someone wants to buy 100 rooms or whatnot, or if they have a group of, 30 VIPs that want to go do something, versus Mr. and Mrs. Jones. We used to be in the, the SEM, SEO, pay-per-click game. Like we want Mr. and Mrs. Jones to book on our website.
Who's mostly buying the 100 rooms at a time? Like, is it large corporations or?
Yeah, it's like our sweet spot has always been athletes' families in the past, because no one really gives them much attention. Also sponsors, sports agents, and a lot of workers. We've sold to tons of like media companies who are bringing in their camera crews.
Yeah, the production crews.
NBC and TD Ameritrade and groups like that. So, there's a bunch of different groups, and we've always been really good about working with all of them. So some of the tour groups, they only work with other tour operators. Some of the ticket guys only work with other ticket guys. Some of the, the agents only work with athletes. And so we've been good about trying to incorporate all of them, and also creating a marketplace where we're in the middle. Like, oh, these guys are hurting because they need to sell these 10 rooms that they overbought, and these guys need the 10 rooms.
It's a win-win. Yeah, I love that. How do you, so when the Olympians start to qualify, I guess I'm interested in the sales process, or finding these individuals that could use them.
Yep.
Are you looking at the Olympic roster and hunting down the families and seeing if they need help, or is there an easier way to kind of get to the...
I mean, every Olympics is a little different, and it depends on our personal relationships. If we have we've been the official tour operator, let's say for USA Luge or for USA Track and Field. And so for USA Track and Field,
they're able to connect you. Yeah.
We were in the processing area for the Olympic team, basically, I think in 2012. So it's like, okay, go get drug tested here, go get your uniform, go sit down, talk to Adam about family accommodation.
That's awesome.
But sometimes, absolutely, we're going and reading the results of the Olympic trials and going, okay, let's go hit them up on Twitter and whatnot, and because the athletes don't want to deal with it, they want a solution where they can just push it off to their family and friends. And some of these people, if Shaun White knows he's going to the Olympics, he's taken care of. He's booked his stuff way out, or his sponsors have.
He knows he's going.
But the guys who are like, who are surprises, for example, like track and field, every event almost has one guy who like wasn't expecting to make it, and his family and his friends, and he might have 40 people who want to go see this, and they don't find out till a month out, right? So that it's like, they have a month to make their plans.
It's funny because, like in sports, it's pretty well known that the Olympians, the Shaun Whites of the world, obviously are doing pretty well with sponsors. But that guy that makes the preliminaries type deal and ends up making the Olympics, he's not loaded in a sense at that point. So is all the family just kind of pitching in and getting together and making sure they can make it?
Yeah, I mean, there's GoFundMes all the time for families and whatnot, and it just depends on the I mean, the athlete. The athlete doesn't want to worry about his family. The athlete's going to be taken care of, obviously. The USOC is going to pay for his trip, and they might even I think they throw him a couple tickets or something like that for his family. But yeah, generally speaking, most sports, 85% of these Olympians are like making, 30 grand or less type of thing. It's a labor of love.
Awesome. So as you move to San Diego, you've had a great career so far, and you've started other companies as well. So that's one thing you've done. When did the next thing come for you?
The next thing started after London. It was a bad Olympics for us, so we lost a bunch of money. We lost $1 million in 18 days, which was painful. Still is painful
to say it out loud.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I would say. It was the night of the opening ceremonies, we lost like 50 grand, and then we did that for the next 2.5 weeks, basically. So
just because the math was wrong and what you thought you can turn them for, type deal.
It's just a combination of things, Again, it was mostly me kind of taking my eye off the ball in terms of not paying attention to things I was paying attention to, and I was trying to be the, kind of a visionary CEO without being in the trenches as well. Like, I'll focus on culture and motivating people and talking to people, where I was also 75% of sales or something, of big sales at the last Olympics, and I was passing off all my leads to my team. And so it was a combination of that. Like I said, there's no lack of accommodations in London, and we bought big because we'd been buying more. It was one of those math things, like I got to buy bigger than I bought last time every time. Go bigger.
It's going to be exactly how it was last year.
But London, every block you walk, there's a hotel. You know what I mean? And so it was just a kind of the perfect storm in a lot of ways. And so so after that, I kind of went back and licked my wounds for a while, and then decided to package up the company and sell it. And then a buddy of mine basically bought it. I partnered with him, but as I was approaching my buddy to ask him to look at my deal, I'm like, as a friend, what do you think of this deal? And he was like, this is a crappy deal. Like, why don't you, I'll match that and we can be partners. And so
you stayed in.
I did that. I moved to Austin. He was based in Austin. So I moved back to Austin where I grew up, and that didn't really work out either, and I didn't like being, I just didn't like, I felt like I was driving to work, type of thing. It wasn't my team. I only had a couple people there that moved with me from San Diego. And so from then I was just really burned out. And that's when I decided to just kind of quit everything. And I took a trip around the world and unplugged for a year.
That's awesome. I want to get into that as well. But I do want to get into, I think it's important for entrepreneurs, the failure aspect. I think a lot of people, they lose $1 million, say 10 days.
Yeah, a little more, but yeah.
But if you, that would break 99% of people. Like I'm over it. I'm going back to the public sector, what have you. And what I've found so far in my small failures is like it teaches you so much, and you kind of look back at it like it was able to teach you a lesson or what have you. So do you come away with that same type of if that didn't happen, this wouldn't happen type of mindset?
For sure. Yeah, I was one of those guys. I was just going to keep betting bigger and bigger. So for me, it was a blessing to happen at some earlier in my career rather than later. And yet the one thing I probably regret is that it didn't happen earlier. I would have liked to, it's only a matter of time till you get your ass kicked. And so I say it's better to get your ass kicked earlier rather than later. And so it was painful. It still is painful, obviously, but it's also, it's just part of the journey. And I think, until that point, I'd been winning a lot in life, and in my athletic career, and my marriage, and everything. And it was the first kind of adversity I'd faced. And I'd by that point I'd started to be around other entrepreneurs, and I'd heard about this, and I'd read about it, and I'm like, when is this going to happen? And so it did, and it was a tough period for sure. And that's something.
What's the mindset like right after that moment? Is it a dark day? Is it a dark week? How do you find the light? Like, I think that's important for entrepreneurs listening to the show too, and upcoming. They're gonna be in that moment. So just interested, like your mindset and how you focused on the light in the tunnel.
It was just for me personally, it was a lot of anxiety, because I had to deal with the repercussions of this guy wants to be paid, this person wants to sue you, this person's unhappy with this, and so for me it was a lot of anxiety, opening up my email in the morning. And it was but a few friends of mine were like, at the end of the day, you have a team to lead. So I still had a team, and they're like, you can be depressed, you can have anxiety, but when you walk through the front doors, before you walk through the front doors, you gotta bang your chest a little bit and show signs of strength. Because if they see that weakness, then you're lost too. So that was a big, acting, gig for me of like, try not to be miserable, try. And at the end of the day, also my team, we had because we had a lot of problems, and they saw what happened. It was one of those things. It was an interesting lesson to teach them, because they also saw our goal for the event was 10 million in revenue. We hit 7, right? Our break even was 8. They thought $7 million. Adam's freaking less rich than he thought he was going to be, but we crushed, So it was an important lesson for us to go like, look, let's open the books, like, which I hadn't been doing up until that point. So we literally taught finance, and we all read The Great Game of Business, and we were trying. I really felt like it was important to show everyone from that point on, like, this is how we make money, right?
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because there's been a lot of different people on both sides of the metrics of, should you open your books? Should it be like more of a team atmosphere? What you should show your team? After going through that, like, what is your best recommendation on when you have a staff, what to show, what not to show for goal setting?
From my perspective, we had, I think his name's Jack Stack, the guy who wrote Great Game of Business. He came to the MIT thing I did a few years ago
nice.
and talked to us. And
I heard that's like the #1 book everybody has to read if you're
awesome. And it's really easy to read, and it's about a manufacturing company.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if they can get into it, any business can get into
right.
it. But once someone was like, I don't want my staff knowing like I don't want them knowing how much money I'm making. And Jack's like, okay, whatever you think that number is, they think it's higher. And so I think you don't want to show them their salaries,
right? Right, of course.
But I think everything else is fair
goals,
game, in terms of like this is how much profit it is, and showing them taxes and showing. I mean, so it's like there's a lot of numbers, and again, I grew up. My dad was an entrepreneur. I remember there was an article and said something about him making $1 million in revenue, and he was running a construction company. So his guys were like, "Oh my God, I'm not getting paid well," and it's 9%, like it doesn't, or nothing.
Yeah,
I mean, sometimes he's taking jobs that lose money to keep his guys working.
Exactly.
So I think there's
misconceptions.
There's tons. But I think in terms of the education piece, I think it's awesome. Like I said, you don't want Bill to know that Susie makes $5,000 more, but you can say the whole HR department makes $700,000.
Cost the company this much. Yeah. I love that. All right, so you decide after this to travel the world. You wrote a book on it, which is awesome. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they're in the grind every day, and they have 2 cell phones like me, and they're working 16 hours a day. And I think there's always a part of me that wishes I could do that. You actually went through and did it with your family too, with a lot of young children. So what made you just say, you know what, F it, we're doing this then?
I think it was a couple things. One was I just wasn't happy at the time doing what I was doing, and I was like, I don't know what I want to do, but it's not this, And so
I need to find myself a little bit here.
Yeah, and I knew, okay, my life, I'm going to spend 10 grand a month living my life, and if I don't work, for example, and spend that 10 grand, I'm going to be stressed about going 10 grand in the hole. Whereas my hypothesis was, if you give me 10 grand a month in cash, I think I could probably go travel the world for less than that.
That's
and even if it is 10 grand, at least I'll have this experience of traveling with my family versus sitting at home stressing about, I just spent another 10 grand on mortgage trying to figure out what I'm doing this month, So it was kind of an unplugging situation. It was also like, as, entrepreneurs who spend tons of money on credit cards, I had millions of miles that I'd been saving for one day for a trip around the world. So it was one of those things like I kind of back of the napkin on a flight, was like, I think I could do this like without paying anything in terms of the flights for my whole family. Which is the
biggest expense,
for sure. I mean, you're talking probably $30,000-$40,000 worth of flights. Just that I
my buddy recently did this kind of travel the world, if you will, for a year. Is it just as basic as like, what do I need per month? Times by 12. If I have 150 grand or whatever, I'm good. Let's do this thing. Like, is that just bare bones how you approached it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I kind of made a budget and I penciled it on my head. And my wife and I had always loved to travel too. And we'd kind of, I wouldn't say grown further apart, but it was like the conflict I'd had with business I was bringing home. So it was like, what do we love doing? We used to love traveling. And because we have this big, larger family now, we don't travel in the same way. And I'm also like an all or nothing guy, right? I can't, for me to go for 10 days to Mexico I can't disconnect, So I was like, I got to sell my bed. I got to rent my house. I gotta do this, and be committed to it.
So you owned a home and you just rented that out for the year as well as one part of it.
I had a few places and I kind of tried to automate. I ended up switching one of them to an Airbnb halfway through my trip, and the house I was living in Austin, yes, I found a renter and did it full time, and it basically broke even.
So at the end of that, I know you wrote a book on it and you really dive into it, but like, A, do you recommend it for every entrepreneur to try to find a way to do it? And then B, like, how'd you come out of that experience after doing it?
The experience was awesome, and it's something I'll remember for the rest of my life. My children will. And for me, it was also like I felt it was something I just have to do. What was different about my situation versus like what everyone else is talking about these days, passive income, all that, is I made it with the acknowledgement that my net worth will be less than it is when I start the trip. And I was okay with that. And I feel like everyone else is telling you got to automate it so you make money while you're in it. And that's a great
very tough
message,
to do, yeah.
But it's like, but if you're waiting for that forever, you could wait forever. Right. And so it's also like, as entrepreneurs, you have to look for these pauses. And it was a little bit of a pause in my, career, I guess you could say, where I was like, there's not any event I'm super excited about at this moment. There's nothing really, because I also felt like I was getting into that trap where it's like, I would tell my wife, give 2 more years and I'm going to do this Olympics and it's going to make so much money and I'm going to get this opportunity to do this. And then I'll pull
It was
back.
always the next thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a big thing with entrepreneurs too, is you never really celebrate the wins. You're always looking for the next win type deal.
For sure. And you're raising the bar every time.
Yeah,
too,
exactly.
Right? If only I had this much money, I'd be happy. You used to say as a kid, and then when you hit that, you're like, oh, that will never do. I need 3 times that.
When does the itch start to scratch? Like at 6 months in, like is there any type of feeling or mentally like, I got to get back at it, my next business venture, because as a purebred entrepreneur, I'm sure that it starts to itch pretty much when you're not doing it.
I would say, kind of towards the end of the trip for sure. When I started talking to people about, I'm landing, right? I'm coming back, and
what's next, Adam?
Yeah. And then, but to be honest, like one of the huge benefits for a trip like this is you're living in the present more than you ever do in normal life. So that was is less of an itch than you think, especially when I was traveling with 4 children, because you're not sitting there by the pool reading business books thinking all day, which I thought I was going to do.
Yeah.
I was like, this will be great. I'll write a ton. I'll read a book every week.
You're getting the kids ready, making sure they don't get hit by cars. You're just like running around.
Figuring out where to eat lunch and then figuring out how to go back and shower. And every day is a bit of chaos. So, and for me, that's a big thing that personally like relieves anxieties when I can focus on the present and not the past or the future, right?
I love that.
So that's why I like travel.
So when you come back and you land back in the States and you like, I'm going to get back after it, what was the next journey or next stop for you?
So as I was finishing up the trip, my old business partner or my old employee kind of approached me about like, look, we've got some of our old clients who want to hire us back for the Olympics. And so it was one of those things like, I don't know if I want to get back in the Olympics.
Like the track and field teams of the world and kind of those.
Yeah. And she was like, well, I have almost $1 million worth of business, and I'm like, okay, let's do it. So I jumped back into that, and it was a very transactional business versus service based, which I liked, because it's like, here's a deal.
Just flipping it,
here's a deal. Here's how it looks. There's not really any risk on it. So, and you can use your connection. So I did that. And then I, started to get more into real estate and the Airbnb stuff. And, during the trip, I kind of had this epiphany of like, I don't ever want to run just one business again, and now here it is a few years later. And I'm like, I kind of romanticize about being really focused on one business, like a lot of my friends are.
So how many businesses do you currently oversee or kind of be a part of right now?
I mean, we have one business that runs a couple of vacation rentals, Airbnb here in San Diego, and the event business, which does Olympics and Oktoberfest and whatnot. And then we bought another business partner, and I bought a hotel downtown in San Diego as well. When you
have I've always been curious, when you have a bunch of different kind of businesses that you're looking over, how do you make sure they're all going well? Like, is that the dashboard mentality? We both saw Scott Fritz in the 40-hour work year recently at one of his conferences. But how do you kind of make sure everything's well and you're in the know?
I'm probably a little more ADD than most people, so I don't know if I'm the most fit to answer this. But I mean, generally speaking, I think it's trying to put the right people in the right places, and then connecting with them. And
so, do you have like the implementer in each of the 3 like buckets?
Yeah, we try.
I love it. All right, so I'd love to, based on your experience, kind of get some of your thoughts on employees and culture and what you've kind of found through your career so far, especially when you're scaling and you're trying to build that. Anything that comes to mind in terms of making sure you're building the team the right way and just making sure that culture is at the right place? I mean,
I think, in terms of culture, it's really like one of the bigger lessons I learned is getting the venom out. And it's like one bad person / seed can really ruin everything you're trying to build. Yeah. And I had that multiple times, and multiple times I waited too long.
They're usually the highest performers as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, you and I have talked about that.
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to, let's get into hiring then, to try to find the right people in the right seats, as they say. Any tips or tricks that you've used over your career too, to kind of make sure you have that right implementer, you have those right people that can push the business forward?
Creating those scorecards and trying to top grade. If you can read that book, Who on Top Grading, that's the book I think in terms of hiring people and kind of knowing what you're looking for. But I think everyone talks about hiring for culture first these days, and skill second. And I think for us, we were always also we're kind of trying to get people like a bit at a discount, because it's like, oh, it's San Diego and we're really sexy.
And it's sports.
And I feel like, maybe we should have looked to get people at market rate, or got a level up, instead of trying to get the $60,000 person and get them to come for 48, maybe we should have been trying to get a $100,000 person and get them to come for 70 with incentives or something like that. But I think ultimately, looking higher, right, in terms of like not just looking for what you want right now, but looking for what you think that person's going to need to be 12, 18 months from then is an important part of the hiring process. You
talked about earlier in your career kind of taking the eyes off the prize. What have you seen through your friends and through your colleagues in the space, the main thing that business owners and entrepreneurs don't focus enough on that they need to be focusing more on?
Profit, by far. I mean, like I said, when I talk about London and the goal of 10 million revenue, there wasn't a profit goal, which is vanity, right? I mean, it's like, and it was because at that point I'd run a bootstrap business that was always profitable no matter what. So I threw, oh, you want to go to this conference and it's $5,000 as an employee? Sure, go. Just make some money. And there wasn't a accountability piece for that, in terms of P&L, in terms of them reporting back, in terms of them marking it, in a CRM that this came from this place. And so I think a lot of people I see are growing and trying to scale. They overuse the word scale, for example, and it's like, and they're focused on growing revenue, growing employees, and they're not focused on the bottom line.
How do you oversee that? Is that, I mean, I like to geek out of the granular nature of it, but on a weekly basis, are you looking with your financial people and making sure profits stay in there? Are you setting quarterly, yearly goals and making sure you're hitting that? Like, how do you oversee all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, if you have a big enough team, you can go back to like the great game of business, and you got guys who are watching. You're like, the whole concept revolves around like every part of the balance sheet or the P&L is related to someone, right?
Yeah.
So everyone's thinking mentality like, I'm going to increase sales. That's how I'm helping this, the P&L for the month. And this other guy's like, I'm operational inventory. So my friend can get us cheaper toilet paper from this source, and we can save money. And if you can get everyone kind
all
of
that
thinking
adds up.
and that's where I think the transparency with your team helps, because they know, like, especially if they're incentivized one way or another, they're like, hey, I want to we can, when we're ordering food, we can order from my friend that said he'll give us a discount, for the whole team or whatever. So if you can get everyone kind of on board with increasing, either increasing sales or decreasing costs, basically those are your two levers for the most part.
So great game of business. Any other books that you've read during your career and it's kind of gave you that epiphany, or ones that you just highly recommend? I always ask people the main books that kind of changed.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed the books you have. They're all good things.
Yeah.
I mean, Drive by Daniel Pink. I like a lot of the Daniel Pink stuff, and Drive's like the classic one in terms of motivating people, building people, cultures as well. And I like Multipliers by Liz Wiseman, which is the same thing. I mean, those are, right in line with building team, building culture.
Love it. So we met, not to make this a commercial for Entrepreneur Organization or EO, but I think so far in my experience, I think it's been a year and a half, 2 years. I know you've, how many years now? 7?
9.
9.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that's been an eye-opener for me is being around other entrepreneurs and making sure your peer group is like-minded individuals. I've realized that I always thought I was the only one having the problems and everybody else had it figured out. And you start to figure out that everybody kind of goes through the ups and downs, and it makes you a little more sane, because I think you can be in your head. I'm sure you found the same type of feeling kind of being absolutely around more. Yeah. With EO, like, how has that changed, and how the importance of peer groups, I guess I would say, not only EO, but being around other people that are kind of going through the same stuff you're going through?
I mean, ultimately, like, when you're hiring people, when you're growing a business, when you're losing a business, you can't go talk to your high school buddies necessarily about this. Not only they'll think you're bragging, or they'll think you're complaining, or they just won't relate. So I feel like you said, whether your businesses don't have to be aligned for you to really share that empathy, or share that sympathy, or or be able to share that experience. So I feel like those peer groups are really valuable to be able to, like you said, just to say, man, I've been
crazy
there.
here?
I've been there. I know what you're going through.
Yeah.
And, one of the interesting things, if you're in these peer groups with, 8 or 10 people or something, is this guy is crushing life. He's crushing business. He's making so much money. This guy's about to go bankrupt. He's going through divorce. And then fast forward 18 months later and they've switched, and it's like, and that's part of this crazy journey, as business owners that we have, is like, we're crazy, right? And we need
to have a few screws loose.
For sure.
All right, so I got a few rapid fire questions for you. People are always obsessed with morning routines. So I'd love to hear from you kind of how you get going on a morning by morning basis.
I mean, I have 5 kids now, so one of them is usually the alarm clock, and I usually take them to school at 7:40. So from 6:40 to 7:40, I'm making lunches, getting cereal, yelling at people to brush their teeth type of thing. On Thursdays, every Thursday, kind of rain or shine, I meet with a group of, there's about 7 or 8 of us, and we run same 8-mile loop at 5:25 a.m. every Thursday. And that's a weekly routine I have for sure.
I was going to ask you about that, because running for me, like I've always loved playing basketball and sports, but running just the run, like from a mental standpoint, and not to say anybody loves running 26 miles, but where did you go? Like, I'm sure that taught you a lot in business too, but like when you're in that marathon or what have you, how do you like mentally get through some of those mental blocks? Because I'm sure you're playing with your mind the whole time when it comes to running.
Yeah, for sure. Running. I mean, I always joked we picked the wrong sport, because not only is there no like money in it, but we pick the sport that everyone's doing for punishment.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, go run a lap.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think the mental games you play with yourself when you're a competitive runner are certainly higher, and I think that teaches you a high pain threshold, as well as discipline, and it's I think of like golf being very mental, tennis being mental, sure. But there's something to be said about sprinting all out at the end of a race with the guy next to you, and it's like, at that point it becomes mental. And they say less in distance running, but more in sprinting. For example, in a 100-meter race, like those 8 guys in the Olympic final are basically the same.
Yeah,
I mean, you get
0.1 of a second.
Yeah, you get Bolt or someone who's an outlier every 15 or 20 years, but you could run that Olympic final every day for a week, and you might get 3, 4, 5 different winners.
That's interesting. What's the farthest you've ever ran?
So I ran a marathon last year, and I didn't train.
Oh, because you usually would do like the shorter distance and the miles and things like that. Okay.
I mean, I trained at 14 miles consistently in college. Like that was our long run for the month. And 14. Then last year I ran a marathon kind of on a dare from some friends.
So what was that final time? Were you happy with the average?
3:04, and I was happy because I was trying to I had the idea to run the Boston Marathon, and I had to run sub 3:10, but I didn't want to train for the Boston Marathon and train to qualify. So I was like, if I can go qualify without training, then I'll train for the Boston Marathon. And
so you qualify without training?
Correct.
After running no more than 14, though, I'm sure once you get towards like 20, it starts to hurt a little bit.
Well, I hadn't run, 14 is what I ran in college. I hadn't run more than like 8 or 9 really. So it was waiting for the pain to come.
I've heard some of those dudes that run like those 100-milers and stuff like that. I don't know how to do it.
That's a whole other world of craziness.
How do you manage stress?
For me, it's just being with family. Even though my family, being with them would stress out most people for the most part, hanging out. But just hanging out in the pool.
4 kids, 5 kids,
5 kids, and they're very loud. I mean, they're like.
What is it though? It's like 3, 4, 7. Like what's it?
They're almost 11, almost 9, 7, 5, 2. So they're every 2 years, then the last one's a 3-year gap. And like I said, they're super loud, but it's fun. Loud. I mean, they all have friends come over and they're like, I need to step outside for a second. This is stressful.
How have you found that balance? I think there's a lot of articles out there. It's kind of the cliche thing to talk about work-life balance. And a lot of people say there's no such thing. You just kind of have to kind of figure out what your passions are and let it roll. But have you been able to effectively turn off, if you will, with family? If so, is there any tips or thoughts you have on that?
I mean, I do think it's a cliche, and I think it's different for everyone. I think it's different for you today than it will be a year from now or 2 years ago. So I think it's a bit of a moving target. I think it's a slippery slope these days with technology, and I find myself like my kid's talking to me and I'm like looking at my phone. I'm like, what are you doing? So you don't want to be doing that. So it's a conscious thing for me of trying to set my phone somewhere else. Yesterday I didn't have my phone on me. I was like, and I try to make those decisions, or I'll put, even with my wife, I'll put my phone on airplane mode after I put the kids down for bed or whatever.
Yeah,
so.
it's like I work in social media, so it's even worse. Like
Yeah.
I have to kind of be connected. But yesterday I was in the conference room and I forgot my phone in my office, and I'm just gonna sit here for a second. I'm not gonna go get my phone. Like sometimes it gets crazy. Is there a business tool that you've used or came across recently that is not changed the game for you, but that you highly recommend, or just kind of instrumental to you being able to run your different businesses?
In terms of like, there's nothing like groundbreaking. I mean, we use Slack a lot, and I like that because it reduces on email, but there's nothing other than that, other than, for me personally, I listen to books, all the time, and that's
Audible.
how I absorb information as well. So I run, and I'm always listening to something while I'm running.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of advice I've ever received.
Deep question.
Yeah, I'd say, what did my wife used to say? Without obstacle, the path with no obstacles usually leads nowhere. Something like that.
I love that.
And I think it's having that. You don't know if it's hard if you've always had it easy.
Yeah. Like it's like you learn nothing through all success. You have to kind of go through failure to learn. So excluding you and your companies, what business or entrepreneur do you admire or think like that guy or that gal or that business is really interesting to me, and I definitely kind of looking at what they're doing?
I mean, again, I hate to have the cliche, but Musk obviously is kind of the superhero,
the modern
in our
day
world.
Edison.
I mean, just because he's trying to solve real problems, and he's an extraordinary human, but he's also human, and he shows that. So anyone that's really, I think, trying to change the world, again, it sounds so cliche, but I was listening to some podcast I think a couple of days ago, and it was talking about how the world's smartest people now are graduating Harvard and they're going to build apps, and and it's like a generation ago they were going to work for NASA and they were solving problems, and now they're going chasing money and
trying to get funded and get an exit and all that. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast recently. Did you see that?
Yeah.
But it was kind of sad. He's like, you don't want to be in my head, dude. Like, he's so smart and so intelligent, but it's constantly, you can never turn it off. And I'm sure you feel that same way. You can never turn it off, but he's like at a whole other level.
Absolutely. But it's also, you see that if you watch the whole thing, he's brilliant.
Oh my God.
And the media chose to focus on him smoking a joint.
I know, it's
right?
true.
I mean, it's like, and they turned it into this negative thing. And I'm like, did you watch the whole thing? Did anyone who's saying this company's going down the tubes, did you not see this genius talking for the other hour?
It still is the most expensive tweet ever tweeted. $20 million for the violation.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about, like in EO, about the BHAG, or the big, hairy, audacious goal that Vern talks about. Kind of for you, what's the light that you're looking at or kind of going towards your why? Yeah,
I mean, for me, it's like mine is a little more granular than like I don't have a, I need to change X number of people's lives, or I need to make, $20 million. Mm-hmm. Me, it's like, can I wake up in the morning and be excited about what's going on for the rest of the day and go attack the day with enthusiasm? And then can I finish that day or the next day or any day thinking like, man, my life is awesome, right? So it's kind of those two reflections of the day, and again, it's never going to happen every day, but that's where I'm trying to be, at this point in my career. I made a little money.
Yep.
I've had some successes, had some failures, but I'm focused on money and revenue and financial, goals, but I'm also, I want to, focus on how I can be a Musk in the small, in my neighborhood type of thing.
Did that happen before you took your trip? Like you had a few too many bad days, if you will, or a few too many days where you weren't excited? You're like, that's when you got to change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, as entrepreneurs and leaders as well, I mean, you have to look at the glass half full, or else your team, you can't expect to lead a team when you don't believe, you're going to be successful.
Well, with me, yeah, exactly. So I'll leave you with this. I know you know a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of smart dudes and gals. Who would you recommend to come on the podcast next that you can nominate that would drop some knowledge for me? The first name that pops in your head. Already had Grayson. So.
I know. I was just thinking about that. I think Ryan Shortell has some really good ideas on changing the world, in terms of giving back, and it's a really unique message, as well as, Ryan Clive Smith, who's got some really interesting things on wealth and, managing wealth and saving wealth and building wealth. So the two Ryans are for sure good.
Appreciate it, man. Well, there it is. Adam Dailey, thank you so much for the time, man. That was awesome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right.